Alright, this is Ghost Stories of West Virginia, Episode 1. And this here is the first story, the Harper House. Now, the Harper House was the second home built in Harper's Ferry by founder Robert Harper and is the oldest surviving building in town. The National Park Service owns it today. Now, the ghost of Rachel Harper, Robert's wife, who was said to have died falling from a ladder, has been seen in an upper window, looking down into the garden. Now, according to lore, she is gazing at the place where she secretly buried the family gold. Another ghost reported in the house is that of a man named Hamilton, a friend of Robert Harper's, who died in the house after taking a fall. The Wager family, who inherited Harper's house, added 2 tenant homes to it. Now, before the Park Service took over, people occupied the homes. Shirley Doherty related in a ghostly tour of Harper's Ferry that a man lived in one of them. His sister came to visit, and one evening he left her alone in the house while he went out to do errands. Now, she heard the front door open and close and thought he had returned. But when she called out, he did not answer. Instead, she heard only a strange whistling. She went to the sub-basement to investigate and heard footsteps brushing down the stairs. Frightened, she left the house and jumped into her car to get help. As she drove away, she saw a sinister-looking man leaning against the railing by the house's stone steps. He was whistling. There was something unsettling about the man, and she tore out in her car. She returned with a park ranger who investigated. At the sub-basement, he was knocked over by a huge dog that ran out of the house. He drew his revolver and gave chase, but the dog vanished, and so did the whistling man. The door to the sub-basement had been painted tightly shut for nearly a decade, and now it was open. As for the dog, was it the same large black dog, often reportedly seen with the ghost of John Brown? No one knows. Now, this here story is called the Wager House. Now, the Wager House, the early residence of one of the founding families, has earned the reputation of being the most haunted house in Harper's Ferry. Now, the last Wager to live there was Catherine Wager, who died in 1829. The house then passed to the Marmion family during the days when the house served as guest quarters for the National Park Service. Now, visitors reported several apparitions. One visitor was awakened from a nap to see a man dressed in 19th century clothing striding across his room with a man who appeared to be dead slung across his shoulder. He walked out into the hall and vanished. A woman dressed in a long gray hooded cloak has also been seen standing at the curve of the hall staircase. Sometimes her hood is up and she gazes down the hallway. She holds the hand of a little girl about 8 years old who also is dressed in traveling clothes from the 19th century. They too vanish from sight. A good-looking man dressed in fine clothing sometimes appears on the servants' stairs. Witnesses notice his brocade vest, top hat, and walking stick. Now, according to Doherty, one woman thought he was a park employee and called out a greeting to him. He glowered at her. She started to walk toward him, asking him what he was doing in the house. His countenance became even angrier, frightening her. She decided to go to her bedroom, but did not want to be trapped there. So she opened the door to the balcony and felt a blow like a fist come down on her shoulder. She stumbled and caught herself. When she turned around, the man was gone. Now, this one here is called the Fire Engine House. John Brown's tall, thin, bearded form has been seen walking about the town of Harper's Ferry, even in daylight, especially around the fire engine house in Lower Town known as John Brown's Fort, where his raid was quashed. Sometimes Brown is accompanied by a large black dog. They vanished through the closed fire engine house door. In 1974, tourists told Doherty that they were impressed by a John Brown reenactor at the fort. He bore an amazing resemblance to the historical Brown and wore authentic period clothing. There was just one problem. No one had been hired to impersonate Brown or reenact the events of the raid. In photographs taken, the mystery man was nowhere to be seen. Voices and gunfire have been heard coming from inside the fire engine house on the anniversary of the raid. Now apparitions of the raiders have been seen as well. All right, everybody, this one here is called Hog Alley. Now Dangerfield Newby, a freed slave who joined Brown, was the first raider killed in Brown's attempt to seize the federal armory in town. Now Newby was either shot or stabbed in the throat and bled to death. His ears were cut off for souvenirs, and his mutilated body was dumped in an alley where hogs were kept. Hogs fell upon the corpse and nearly devoured it. Newby's story is a sad one. He was half white and had been freed by his master. His wife and 7 children remained enslaved in Virginia, and he sought to get them freed as well. Their master said he would free Newby's wife and youngest child for $1,500. But when Newby was able to raise the funds, the price went up. Embittered, he joined Brown's cause. He was the first raider to die. Now Newby's ghost, showing a gashed throat and wearing the slouch hat and baggy trousers he wore the day he died, walks about Hog Alley, located between High and Potomac Streets, where his corpse was savaged by hogs. Now, Newby was initially buried in Harper's Ferry in 1899. His body was moved to North Elba, New York, where it was buried in a common grave near John Brown. All right, y'all, this one here is called Camp Hill Soldiers. Now, the sounds of fife music, drumming, and a marching parade, remnants from colonial days, sometimes drift around Camp Hill near Fillmore Street. The ghosts of French troops stationed in Harper's Ferry in 1798 to 1799, awaiting transport to France in the event of a war between their country and the new United States, are thought to be responsible for the haunting. Now, the troops filled their time by marching up and down the streets to drums. Some died in an outbreak of cholera and were buried on Camp Hill. After the threat of war passed, many of the soldiers stayed and settled in Harper's Ferry. Phantom sounds of the parading soldiers are still heard, but the soldiers are never seen. All right there, this one here is called Maryland Heights. Now, the hills across the Potomac River on the Maryland side, called Maryland Heights, were strategic locations for fighting during the Civil War. Ghosts and phantom fires, seen from time to time there, are said to be the remnants of the battles and of a tragedy that reportedly took place in July of 1861. A group of 100 Days men from Ohio were camped out on the heights. After a day of heavy rain, they had difficulty getting a fire going for their dinner and that night. Evidently, they were poorly trained in munitions, for they assembled some large ammunition shells and sticks for their fire. The shells exploded, killing all the men. They are believed to be frozen in time, still cooking their dinners and trying to get warm. Now, other ghostly campfires are sometimes seen accompanied by phantom smoke, the smell of sulfur, and the sounds of cannons exploding and bayonets clashing. They may be related to the Battle of Harper's Ferry, fought from September 12th to September 15th of 1862. Now, General Robert E. Lee wanted control of Harper's Ferry, and sent Stonewall Jackson and the Army of Northern Virginia down the Shenandoah River to attack it on 3 sides. The Union commander in town, Colonel Dixon S. Miles, decided to keep most of his troops close to town instead of placing them in key positions on the heights. The Confederates were able to gain the advantage by taking charge of the hills. They drove out the Union troops, bombarded the town with heavy shelling, and captured the Union garrison and the armory. Miles was mortally wounded in the fighting and died the following day. Now the Confederates took 12,000 Union prisoners and marched on to Sharpsburg, Maryland, and then to the bloody Battle of Antietam. Today, Maryland Heights is part of the Harpers Ferry National Park and features hiking trails that afford striking views of town. Now, hikers pass by the ruins of Union fortifications, including ammunition pits, breastworks, powder magazines, and gun batteries. The remains of the main Union fort are at the summit of the heights, with a military camp below. All right, everybody, this one here is called St. Peter's Church. Now, St. Peter's Catholic Church, located above Harper's Ferry on a hill with a splendid view and accessible from town by steep steps, is one of the city's favorite haunted sites. The third church in town, it was built on land donated by founder Robert Harper between 1830 and 1833. The neo-Gothic architecture and original Tiffany stained glass windows lend it a spooky atmosphere. Now, according to lore, the church was the only one in Harper's Ferry to survive the Civil War, because its quick-thinking priest, Father Costello, raised the British flag whenever fighting broke out. Both armies avoided shelling the church in order to avoid creating an international dispute. It has been in continuous use ever since and has been renovated and enlarged. Now, several phantoms are associated with the church, those of a Civil War soldier, Father Costello, and a wailing baby. During the Civil War, St. Peter's was used as a hospital. An unidentified wounded soldier was taken to the churchyard for medical help. His wounds did not appear to be life-threatening, the story goes, so he was left outside while more urgent cases were handled. He slowly bled and was near death when he was at last taken inside the church. "Thank God I am saved," he declared, but he died as he crossed the threshold. His ghostly voice still whispers, "Thank God I am saved." Some nights when visitors enter the church, some people have also seen a mysterious golden light at the threshold. The ghost of Father Costello, wearing a black friar's hat, has been seen leaving the rectory and walking toward the church, where he disappears through the walls. He is especially observed around dusk by people walking the path to nearby Jefferson Rock. Sometimes people have mistaken him for an oddly dressed living person. The ghost baby is heard but not seen. It cries on the steps of the church. It is thought that the infant was a victim of the Civil War fighting in town. This here is called Jefferson Rock. From St. Peter's Church, you can follow a winding path uphill to Jefferson Rock, a shell rock formation with a spectacular view of the confluence of the Shenandoah and the Potomac rivers. The formation is part of the Appalachian Trail. Now, Thomas Jefferson, the namesake of the rock, was so taken with the view here when he visited in 1783 that he said, "On your right comes up the Shenandoah, having ranged along the foot of the mountain 100 miles to seek a vent. On your left approaches the Potomac in quest of a passage also. In the moment of their junction, they rushed together against the mountain. rend it asunder, and pass off to the sea. This scene is worth a voyage across the Atlantic. Originally, the rock was a single slab that rocked back and forth on top of another stone. Now, the stone deteriorated and became increasingly unstable over time. Now, around 1860, 4 red sandstone pillars were added to it. Jefferson Rock is a popular resting and meditation spot with a serene atmosphere. Sometimes apparitions are seen nearby and on the path, and whispery voices are heard in the breeze. Perhaps they are the remnants of visitors from times past, who also came to admire the beauty of the view. Now this one here is called Harper Cemetery, pardon me. There is a story concerning Harper Cemetery that is so bizarre it must be told. Even though the haunting evidence is slim, the cemetery lies along the Appalachian Trail, which passes through Lower Town. According to Doherty, a Dr. Brown, who worked for the U.S. War Department, was sent to Harper's Ferry in the early 19th century to attend to armory workers. He had spent time in the West learning about the medical treatments used by Native Americans. Now, the house in which he lived on High Street in Harper's Ferry was destroyed during the Civil War, but a natural cave still exists, where he stored some of his herbal medicines. Brown died in 1833. Apparently, he believed that he could resurrect himself from the dead with his medicines. His will stipulated that he be buried in Harper Cemetery, standing upright in his casket with his head above ground. The casket was to have a glass window for the head. He left money to pay 2 men to attend his grave for 9 days and nights around the clock. They were supposed to assist him when he resurrected himself. Now the 9 days and nights passed, but Brown's corpse remained motionless in the grave. The hired help left. No one bothered to rebury Brown, so he was left standing in his casket with his head exposed above ground. Eventually, the glass window broke and his head separated from his decomposing body. Lore holds that children used the rotting head as a kickball. Someone evidently took the skull and kept it. In the early part of the 20th century, about 100 years later, a man in Pennsylvania claimed that to have the skull of John Brown and wrote a letter to the John Brown farm in North Elba, New York, where the abolitionist was buried. His claim was refused, for John Brown's grave had never been disturbed. Perhaps the man thought the skull of Dr. Brown was that of John Brown, since it had been rolling about a Harper's Ferry cemetery. Now, paranormal investigators have gone to Harper's Ferry, but no one has reported seeing the ghost of the unfortunate Dr. Brown. Minor haunting phenomena, such as orbs and unusual temperature fluctuations, have been documented. However, does Dr. Brown haunt his final place of unrest? All right, this one here is called the Iron Horse Inn. The modern ghost lore of Harper's Ferry began at the old Iron Horse Inn, which occupied a building constructed in 1798 as the first home of the superintendent of the U.S. Armory. Now, the building was vacated during the Civil War and used as a barracks by both Confederate and Union troops. Now, after the war, it was auctioned off with other government buildings and eventually became the inn. Shirley Doherty opened the Iron Horse Inn on Potomac Street in 1968, never anticipating that the place would be haunted. The first dramatic experience happened one night while her son and daughter-in-law were working there. They closed up and were getting ready to go home when a door to an upstairs room began to shake violently, followed by a thumping sound descending the stairs, hitting every step. Both initially thought the other had fallen down the stairs, but they could find nothing to account for the noises. A few weeks later, Doherty had the same experience while she was alone in the restaurant. Now, intrigued, Doherty did some research and discovered that a Confederate soldier's ghost was believed to haunt the building. A local resident told her that just before the Battle of Gettysburg at the start of July 1863, Union forces were occupying the building. A Confederate spy came into town to determine the strength of the Union troops. He was challenged on Potomac Street, and he panicked and ran into the building where Union officers were housed. He dashed up the stairs. An officer pulled out his gun and shot the spy, who tumbled backward down the stairs as he died. Apparently, his spirit had been making his final fall over and over again throughout the years. Other poltergeist phenomena also manifested at the restaurant, such as a kerosene lantern that went flying off a mantel every Saturday for 9 consecutive weeks. An invisible force also played with the water. Doherty learned that a family that had previously occupied what became the restaurant had been mysteriously drenched with water thrown from the stairway. The Iron Horse Inn no longer exists. More than 20 years ago, the building was converted to apartments. All right, this one here is called the Hilltop Hotel Site. One of Harper's Ferry's most haunted locations in town, the Hilltop Hotel, is closed indefinitely, but is worth knowing about, as someday the site may reopen and the ghosts may return. The Hilltop Hotel was built in 1888 on land overlooking the confluence of the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers and the hills where Civil War fighting took place. Famous people stayed there, including Mark Twain, Alexander Graham Bell, and 2 presidents, Woodrow Wilson and Bill Clinton. The 76-room hotel suffered 2 fires in 1912 and 1918 and was rebuilt both times. Now, over the years, however, its condition gradually declined. When I stayed there in the late 1990s for an investigation, it was worn and tired, but still haunted. Phenomena included apparitions, phantom footsteps, poltergeist activity, furniture being moved around, banging sounds in the empty kitchen at night, laughter, and voices. Now, people also reported seeing ghostly campfire lights from Civil War battle days on the Maryland Heights across the Potomac River at night. More than a decade later, the structure had deteriorated to the point where it was deemed unsafe and unsalvageable. Now, in 2008, a group of investors purchased the Hilltop, intending to raise it and build a large 179-room luxury hotel and spa. They expected enthusiastic support from the community, but got the opposite reaction instead. Local residents objected to the scope of the prospective facility, arguing that Harper's Ferry should remain small and sleepy. As of 2013, the Hilltop still sat empty and in limbo, partially collapsed as a result of structural problems. Now, even though the building is not accessible, the view is worth a visit to the site, especially at night when you might catch a glimpse of those phantom campfires glowing through the trees of Maryland Heights. If the structure is demolished and a new hotel is constructed, it's possible that the hauntings will resume on that site. All right, everybody, this one here is Charlestown and environs, right? Charlestown, the Jefferson County seat, owes its legacy to the George Washington family, many members of whom have their final resting places in town. The future first president of the United States of America, George Washington, was 16 years old when he surveyed the eastern panhandle of Lord Fairfax in 1748. He was so taken with the land that he purchased a tract along Bullskin Run and kept adding to it until he had acquired 2,300 acres. His half-brother Lawrence also acquired land, which went to his brothers George Samuel, John Augustine, and Charles after his death in 1752. Now, George's youngest brother, Charles, had a home in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Now, in 1780, he decided to move to his inherited land, which at that time was in Berkeley County. He built his final home, Happy Retreat, on a rise overlooking Evetts Marsh, spending his remaining years there with his wife, Mildred, and their family. He also set aside 80 acres for the formation of a town, which the Virginia General Assembly approved in 1786. Charles called it Charlestown and named streets and the town square after members of the Washington family. Happy Retreat was on the outskirts of town. The Washingtons entertained lavishly, and Happy Retreat was a favorite stopping place for a prominent traveler. Now, Charles stated in his will that upon his death, Berkeley County should be divided in Charlestown, and Charlestown should become the new county seat. He set aside lots on the town square, formed by George and Washington Streets, to be used as public facilities. After Charles died in 1799, his son Samuel, who was executor of his will, followed his father's wishes. Jefferson County was created in 1801, named in honor of President-elect Thomas Jefferson, with Charlestown as the county seat. Now, the town has remained the county seat except for a period between 1863 and 1871, when the seat was moved temporarily to Shepherdstown because of damage to the courthouse during Civil War fighting. Now, today, Charlestown, whose spelling differentiates it from the state capital, Charleston, has about 5,300 residents. Its downtown preserves its 18th and 19th century heritage. Now, ghosts abound, although none have been reported at Happy Retreat. The most famous ghost is that of the abolitionist in Charlestown. Brown's ghost seems quite busy, also haunting Harper's Ferry, where he staged his failed raid.